Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we explore the future and what this means for your leadership. We ask the big questions. What's happening on the horizon? What does this mean for us? And most importantly, what skills do I need now for leadership of the future? It's time to explore. Let's go.
Hello there, it's Zoe Routh, your friendly neighborhood leadership futurist, Canadian-Australian one, that is, and welcome to a solosode. So there's some interesting things to process and digest and to put on the table for you in our quest for being fit for the future as leaders. First, a personal update. I know you've been dying to hear what's happening in my world. Maybe not. I've been writing the novel. Yes, the sequel to the Olympus project called Olympus Bound. I'm about 10% in, and I've written 13,000 words. Yay! And it is so much fun. I am having such a blast writing this novel. So I'm still on track for my deadline to wrap up the first draft by June. And the editor still has the sequel in hand. So, yep, all things are progressing there. I also did a fabulous bushwalk with my running buddies, 3 days in the Aurora Valley here. And it was just extraordinary. It was just so good to be out wandering through the bush and experiencing sunshine, big skies, beautiful environment in the company of friends. And I'm so grateful that my knee held up. So my knee injury seems to be very much healed. The downside was my feet just kill. So I made the mistake of not taking insoles in my boots, thinking that would be better than my orthotics, and suffered the consequences. So I either need new insoles, new boots, or new feet. You go figure. And the third thing on my personal update is a big shout out to my good friend, Gary Monkman. Gary and I met when we were just babes in the wood at the age of 17, working together for the first time at summer camp, Camp Stevens. And we were thick as thieves, fast friends the entire time we were there. So we shared a great bond, and we were always seen together, hanging out and having fun, having a good old laugh. And I hadn't spoken to him in 20 years. Wow. It makes you sound really old. But he did a shout out on Messenger to a bunch of us old camp buddies and said, "Hey, I miss you guys. You're important to me, and let's connect." I'm like, yes, sometimes we need to show leadership in reaching out to others. And Gary overcame the embarrassment that we both had for not reaching out to each other and not being in contact. And I spent an hour chatting with him. It was like the 20 years hadn't been there at all. Lots of things had gone on in our lives, but our friendship remains. So I wanted to shout out to Gary. Love you, Gary. Thank you so much for doing that. And also to encourage each of us to think about where we got people in our lives that we've just parked in a corner because it feels like it's too hard to reach out and too much time has gone by. But when we think about it, life is short. And if we love those people, let's get over ourselves and let's be the leader and make the connection. And largely people are pretty happy to hear from you. So there you go. That's my personal blurb for today. We are talking about meta-modern leadership. The theme for this quarter in Amplifiers is lead culture with the subtopic of meta-modern leadership. So I dug in a little bit with ChatGPT and to explore the differences between meta-modern leadership and leadership maturity framework. Really, they're similar in approach. So what is meta-modern leadership? It sounds very wanky. And I think it's just a big term for a relatively straightforward concept, maybe not a simple one. So let's look at the evolution of leadership. We had the modern style of leadership, which is focused on objective truth, linearity, progression, that kind of thing. So if we map it against the other leadership models I've talked about, the values model, it's the orange stage of leadership maturity, or the leadership maturity framework itself. This is the achiever stage. So we're talking about cold hard facts, objective truths, science, taking a rational approach to addressing issues and challenges. Postmodern leadership is the next stage beyond that, which is where we challenge all that. We go underneath the hood of objective reality and look at constructed reality. We look at beliefs, we look at values, we look at our assumptions, and we have a look at the different layers of different kinds of truths. And that's kind of postmodernism, modernism, tongue twister. Modernism is really like looking at black and white stuff. Postmodern is looking at the gray areas. Meta-modern leadership is taking that step further and synthesizing the best of the modern and the postmodern and synthesizing it together. So it's all very conceptual. So let's get down a little bit more to what this means for your day-to-day leadership. Meta-modern leadership is characterized with being able to navigate complexity, address complexity, understand and tease out complexity. So taking a little bit of the postmodern approach here. It's being comfortable with ambiguity, so things that aren't clearly defined. And I was talking to one of my friends who recruits people, and he was saying he had a lot of success in his recruitment strategy. And it was quite interesting to hear about that. I'm like, what do you look for when you hire candidates? And he said, high tolerance for ambiguity, because they don't always have the full brief, they don't always get the details, and they can often change. So, and this is characteristic of meta-modern leadership. It's also characteristic of post-conventional leadership in the leadership maturity framework, where, there's not a clear boundary about what's right or wrong, or even what the information is or what the destination is. So being comfortable with being uncomfortable is a characteristic of this. The third aspect of meta-modern leadership that's useful to keep in mind is the ability to navigate paradox. So two competing ideas which look contradictory, and be able to sit with them in your brain at the same time. This is the power of and. And if we look back a little bit on the three last interviews that we just did on the show, the Dranat Saris mother and daughter team, and their focus on compassion and understanding and empathy is also a hallmark of meta-modern leadership or post-conventional leadership. Dawn, our fighter pilot, was all about connection and having each other's back. And I think that's a really important aspect of this too. We take the best out of modern leadership, which is building a tribe, a community, and connection with other humans. And we need to carry that forward with us. And Carolyn Butler Maiden and her idea around contribution, taking the bigger picture in mind and enlarging our circle of who we are, that is also characteristic of what is essential in the meta-modern leader. And coming up, we've got some other really cool interviews too, which I'll talk to you about at the end of the show as a little bit of a teaser for what's coming. I want to make this practical for you though, because yes, we can get it in theory, but what does that mean to you day to day as you rock up to your workplace or log in from home or wherever it is that you're logging into? How can I be a meta-modern leader who can address uncertainty, paradox, ambiguity, and complexity in my day-to-day life? There's 3 practical exercises you can implement with you and your team to help develop your cognitive, your emotional, and your moral flexibility. Moral flexibility sounds dodgy. Capacity, maybe that's a better word. Your moral, your mental, and your, now I've forgotten the 3. Let's develop your leadership capacity. And these are the 3 practical exercises. The first one is synthesize. Synthesize. Whenever I hear the word synthesize, I automatically think synthesizer, and then I automatically go to Thomas Dolby from the 80s and She Blinded Me with Science. Do, 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 do. That wasn't the tune, but if you know the song, if you know the 80s, you know synthesizers were all the rage. And synthesizers are not just about electronic music. It's also about taking 2 ideas or 2 thoughts or 2 trends and merging them. So how do we go about doing that? It's all about picking up threads of what we're seeing and smashing them together. Essentially, this is what I do in my Fit for the Future workshops, where we learn futurist thinking skills, where we look at trends and we build scenarios. And when we do that, that's an element of synthesizing. So we ask questions like, okay, what are the 2 biggest trends that we're facing right now? Okay, it could be fear and uncertainty in the marketplace combined with, let's say, supply chain challenges. Right. So with the supply chain challenges, they could improve or they could get worse. And with uncertainty, it could improve or it could get worse. So we've got some two poles to play with, and we can map that out. That's an idea of starting to synthesize ideas. Or we look at different philosophies or different situations, and we take the best of both to present something new and unique. It's a creative thinking exercise. So you can do it with something pretty basic. You can take two products and go, what's the best of this product and what's the best of that product? What if we blended them together? How cool would that be? And you can see a lot of this taking off in the artificial intelligence space at the moment, where people are taking artificial conversational intelligence platforms and blending it with art, say. And that's Midjourney. So Midjourney is a text-to-image AI where you can plug in some words and directions, and the AI siphons through a whole bunch of data and creates a new and unique image. It's actually a practical example and a great metaphor for what the talent or skill of synthesis is all about. So practice taking one thing and another thing and creating something new. It's a creative thinking exercise. So that's your first exercise. Synthesize. Number 2, visualize. So visualizing actually feeds into how to develop your sense of compassion. And the exercise is this, is to ask yourself, first of all, what level are you watching the world from? Are you taking the ant view, as in the thing that is right in front of my nose, my immediate world, my immediate home, my immediate family, my immediate colleagues? And that's kind of the ant view. And that's your sense of usness. And if you zoom out a little bit, you go up in elevation. Maybe you have a street view. Maybe you have a connection with the people on your street. And if you keep going, maybe it's your city. Maybe it's the state in which you live. Maybe it's your country. Maybe it's your continent. Perhaps it's the globe, the whole of planet Earth. Or perhaps it's the globe in the galaxy. Or perhaps it's the galaxy in the universe. The challenge here is to figure out, where are you looking and where does your boundary of us end? Who do you consider them and who do you consider us? At some point, you're going to tap out and go, no, they're them. The difference between me and that other human or sets of human is too great. And that is sort of your limit of compassion, if you like. I often talk about, as an exercise in compassion, is to imagine the person you most like to loathe. It could be a public figure. It could be someone in your family. And work your way into being able to have compassion for them by maybe remembering them that they were once a child, a baby. And as a baby, do they not deserve compassion? And from there, you can start to find a level or a thread of compassion for that human. And with that, it gives you can breathe life into that sense of connectivity with other people. So this is one of the hallmarks of meta-modern leaders, is this ability to have compassion, to exercise and lead from compassion. Not blindly. It doesn't mean that just because someone was once an infant means that all is forgiven. Of course not. We need to be sensible as well as sensitive. It's something I wrote about in my book called People Stuff. It's about wise and compassionate leadership, not just compassion, compassion, compassion. So we've got synthesize, we've got visualize, and the third exercise for you is harmonize. No, it's not a singing exercise, and I'm not going to demonstrate because my voice needs work, it needs some training. This is all about being able to handle paradox and be able to have the mental flexibility to go between two disparate ideas and find value in both. You can see that this is also a precursor to synthesizing ideas. My best tip for you is to go and read this book by Derek Sivers. Derek Sivers is Sivers, and it's called How to Live, and the tagline is 27 conflicting answers and one weird conclusion. So in it, he's done an exceptional job of distilling or boiling down to its core essence, competing life philosophies and how there's value in each. For example, to live well, you need to plan everything. And he goes through and explains the value of planning everything, from it liberating you from having decision fatigue to having a lot of certainty and safety in your world. And considering the polar opposite, which is plan nothing and be open to opportunity and flexibility and all the advantages that come with that. So he's essentially doing polarity exercises as he looks at these 27 conflicting life philosophies. And it's liberating because for two reasons. One is it means that no matter what your choice is, it's always going to be good. And two, it gives you more options. So instead of trying to find the right way, there's always a right way. And if you know the benefits of the way that you choose, you can embrace that, knowing also that there is an alternative path which would be just as good. Which reminds me of the poem that is always misquoted by Robert Frost, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. And everybody thinks your choice is always to take the path less traveled by. But the next sentence, and this is my bugbear, the next part of the verse is, but really the path had worn them just the same. Meaning that it's only by reflecting back, I've put meaning on my choice to say, I picked that one because it seemed to be less worn. Reality was, it was the exact same as the other one. It didn't matter which one I picked, but I've put meaning on the path that I took because it makes me feel better that I, took the path less traveled by. So it's about meaning making as opposed to actually picking the path that was less traveled, meaning the path that not everybody picks. This poem is about, I made an arbitrary decision. I made myself feel better about it later. But nobody really addresses that. So that was a side rant. Maybe it was helpful to you or not. Maybe you can go look up the poem yourself and come back to me with your opinion. So the How to Practice Paradox is actually to read this short little book, How to Live by Derek Sivers, and to play with each of the philosophies in there and see which one you gravitate to, and can you hold each of them lightly. And that's the value of practicing harmonize, and it's the practice of polarity. Because if you do too much of one thing, you lose the advantage of it and it becomes a deficit. That is the practice of polarity. So synthesize, visualize, and harmonize. That is your practical pathway forward to developing meta-modern leadership and your flexibility in being able to handle complexity, ambiguity, and uncertainty. Okay, hopefully that was helpful for you. Now, another big recommendation, breakthrough book. I've been waiting for this book for a long time, by Tim Urban, just came out. It's called What's Our Problem? A Self-Help Book for Societies. What's Our Problem? A Self-Help Book for Societies. I absolutely love this book. Tim Urban writes the blog Wait, But Why? Fabulous blog. He illustrates all of his blogs and his book with stick figure drawings, which are very funny and very apt. He has an absolute talent for using analogy to explain complex challenges. And in this book, what he does is he unpacks the challenges of the individualist stage of leadership maturity, that post-conventional stage where we start to develop a sense of concern for the environment, where we focus on diversity and inclusion, where we want to be more equal. So it's characteristic of the individualist stage and actually parallel the meta-modern leadership stage, where we are dealing in diversity, inclusion, and environmentalism, and complexity, ambiguity, and paradox. That all sits in there. What he points out in the book is how we've become so polarized. How is it that we're not listening to each other anymore? He talks about this ladder of thinking, where at the base level of the ladder is our primitive mind, where we are just in reactive mode based on survival mode. And at the top of the ladder is the scientific way of thinking, the rational brain, basically the modern brain, where we can toss ideas around and argue their value based on what the idea offers. That is the rational brain, the logical brain, the science brain, versus the emotional brain, which is all about protecting self, tribalism, etc. And he says where we've got to now in our societies, that we've lost the plot a little bit. We've lost our ability to argue constructively, to toss ideas around and explore their value together. And we've become tribes of reactive, emotional people, and we are tearing each other down. So he does a fantastic critique of the right-wing conservative movement based in the US, but it shows up everywhere in the world, versus the progressive left-wing movement. And his argument is that both are factional, both are tribal, or both are coming from the lower mind, and both need to elevate their thinking so that we can start to have reasonable conversations about practical application and pathways through this mess that we found ourselves in. It's probably the best critique I've had of showcasing the downsides of this leading edge of leadership maturity that we're moving into. And the downside is this blindness to our judgmentalism. When we get into the individualist stage of leadership maturity, we espouse the value of diversity and inclusion and egalitarianism and want to dismantle some of the structures that have come before us. So you hear a lot of talk about decolonizing leadership or decolonizing political structures or decolonizing hierarchy power structures and going back to a more egalitarian world. And certainly one of our guests coming up talks a little bit about that. What we need to be mindful of is that we can get so passionate and enamored about this importance of being inclusive and focused on the environment and the world and the global citizenship that if someone challenges some of our statements, we see them as less than. We see them as ignorant. We see them as racist. We can see them as fill in the name, fill in the blank, basically, as someone not as equally minded and liberated as us. And this is the blind spot, because everyone's equal except for those who don't believe like us. And it's where the left-wing progressive movement has lost its capacity to sit in its own mess and be open to other ideas and seeing the value of other worldviews. And it's a huge blind spot. And because a lot of people and organizations are now in positions of power, it is tearing down and abusing people in a way that shouldn't be happening. And Tim lays it all fantastically out there in his book, What's Our Problem? A Self-Help Book for Societies. The downside of all of this challenge, this sort of political correctness gone wrong or gone over the top, is that it shuts down people. It shuts people down. And so people are reluctant to raise concerns about, like, hey, this, guiding principle about whatever it is. Maybe it's affirmative action. Maybe it's the critique of merit-based promotions. Maybe it's, for the example that Ken Wilber gives in one of his essays is about, for example, banning clapping at an event because one person felt uncomfortable with clapping. That's an example of going too far the other way to be inclusive, in that you throw the baby out with the bathwater. This human norm that we have of applauding presenters or applauding presentations is a mutual understanding of something good, something that generates a sense of pride, boosts serotonin, etc. And because of one person's experience, none of us get to experience that. That's an example of how we can take political correctness and inclusion and go a bit too far so that we lose all the benefits of some of our traditions. That's what Tim talks about. He's like, how far have we gone? What if we created a space to challenge the ideas and not the person? That we don't label people because they have differing ideas to us, and that we approach the idea mulling as a scientific inquiry and not get so attached to our philosophies, to our beliefs, that they become like our persona, they become our personality, they become what he describes as their beautiful baby. That's the analogy he gives. Ideas that we can toss around and move around like Lego blocks, or we get so emotionally attached to our ideas like as if they were babies. So if someone says, hey, your baby's ugly, we get emotionally insulted by that, as opposed to, hey, your Lego blocks are ugly, and we're less attached to it. So that's my second book recommendation, is What's Our Problem? Self-Help Book for Societies by Tim Urban. I found myself nodding and chuckling, and then cringing and weeping, and finally a little vestige of hope through it all. So I wanted to thank Tim for publishing this book, for writing this book. It took him 6 years, and for getting it out into the world, and to encouraging open discourse. Adam Grant is doing the same with his book, Rethink, and I think it's important that us as leaders, we create the space to challenge these ideas and to say, what are we doing here? Is this still helpful? And be brave enough to challenge what sounds like a default, and making sure that we're doing the right thing by others. All right, so that's it for this week's soliloquy, if you like, on the show. A couple of exciting things we've got going on. We've got a new webinar out there. You can hop on to my website, zoerouth.com, click on events, and you'll see it there. It's called Fit for the Future, where I'm going over some key ideas and skills that you need for leading into the future, being future ready and future fit. What else? We've got Amplifiers Academy open and for registration, so you can hop on and start self-educating in a useful way, in a self-guided way, in your own time frame, at your own pace. I think that's probably all the news that is fit to print for today. So coming up on the show, we have Justin Bean, the author of What Could Go Right, which is an extraordinary book and full of amazing optimism. I can't wait to share him with you. So I hope you have a great rest of your month. We're almost coming up to the end of March now and heading into Easter time, if you celebrate that. April is spring in the Northern Hemisphere, and heading into late autumn down here, down under. So wherever you are, live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast. To find out more about leadership of the future, or to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.